Ryan, I have worked 28 of the last 48 hours. I am tired. It is a Saturday morning. Even though this recording was my idea and it is entirely my fault, I hold you responsible for it.
You say you worked 28 hours. It only took me less than an hour to read the comic, so...
But big muchly words.
You used a lot of words like hunt and Kraven.
Kraven, hunt,
Spider.
grave, 2 weeks, spider. You Control F, remove those words from this comic, and there is nothing left.
Oh, yeah, it's what it's about. But that's why we're here.
Cue the music.
Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyra podcast. I'm Ryan, also known as Comic Stan. I love comic books. My co-host loves regular books, the ones with all the words, but I make him read comic books and then we talk about them in depth. And with me, as always, is my aforementioned stalking co-host, it's Jamie. I just tried to find a synonym for hunting and none of them were particularly good.
Bruh.
Hunter-gatherer?
You can't, look, right? AI at some point is going to run out of like cereal packets to read, and they're going to start feeding
and Reddit
it.
posts.
And Reddit is that are they feeding?
Oh yeah.
Reddit posts.
Yes, which is why I'm so optimistic about the future of AI.
I'm not. Have you seen? I mean, in fairness, the comment section on a Reddit thread is probably one of the sort of best places on the internet, I would argue. It's the only comment section I'll hang out in.
True, but also I see a lot of instances of people going, hi, I'm a person who spent my entire life studying this subject, and then someone posted something on Reddit that was incorrect about the subject, so I posted correcting them, and then everyone told me I was wrong. I've seen that a bunch from people.
I had a really fun one the other day. They were. I think it was a thread about Taylor Swift dating a 20-year-old when she was like, or a 19-year-old when she was in her 20s. And this American was like, because somebody was like, oh, 20 is a grown-ass adult. And this American went, well, if 20-year-olds were grown-ass adults, why can't they drink? And I just responded, in civilized countries, they can.
Ooh, you showed him.
Fuck you.
Winning arguments on the internet is the best use of anyone's time, I
Winning
think.
arguments on the internet that nobody started. Like, starting and winning an because I never heard back from that guy, so I fucking showed him.
Oh, you probably destroyed his life.
I destroyed his life while taking a poop at work.
That is the traditional way to do it.
Well, what? I mean, when else? Like,
when else have you got time for Reddit?
I'm a busy man. I have a lot on. I'm not just sat there at home scrolling on Reddit. Reddit is something I do when I'm supposed to be somewhere else.
I mean, that's also what anyone listening to this podcast and us making the podcast. And speaking of podcasting, here's the podcast episode. We're talking about Kraven's Last Hunt.
Your voice really cracked there.
I had a moment where I was like, I could take another breath, but it'd probably be more entertaining if I didn't. And I think I was right. I was right.
Wait a minute. Are you consciously breathing, Ryan?
Not consciously breathing, but you know when you're running out of breath and you're like, I have to stop this sentence to catch breath. Like that's when your body sends the signal to the brain, like the lungs aren't catching up. Like tell mouth to fucking shut, you know? And that's what happened.
I'll be honest with you, Ryan. I think that's the state that I exist in most of the time.
Yeah, I don't think your brain and your mouth are as connected as most other people's. And speaking of body parts being connected, I don't know, that was a good
segue. I like it.
Here's a character whose body parts are all connected to each other.
Hey, Kraven.
Kraven's last hunt. Unfortunately, we didn't do his first hunt or any of his middle hunts, so...
No,
we're just starting at the end here.
We don't know how he flew, only how he landed. And man, did he land.
He burnt bright.
He Hemingway'd himself.
That's what's the candles that burn the brightest go out quickest or something?
I burn my candle at both ends. It may not burn all night, but I'll tell you foes and I'll tell you friends, it'll burn with a wondrous light.
And also spider burning bright. That's a thing of this comic, isn't it?
Spider burning bright. Spider light the night.
No, I think
I made that up.
Okay. Well, good gold star for
thank you
for coming
for
up
effort.
with that post.
So because this isn't actually like a run, is it?
No,
this is a bunch of bits cobbled together out of a bunch of runs, right?
It's a thing that Marvel and DC do occasionally. I think Marvel more often does, although I might be wrong in that. But what they do is it's a story across issues.
It
but
was a story, yeah.
It takes place across like 3 different runs. So they're all Spider-Man titles, but they just do part 1 and 2 in like Amazing Spider-Man, and then 3 and 4 in just Spider-Man, and then like a third Spider-Man title. But it's meant to be like, hey, if you're only reading one of these titles, you're going to have to buy the other 2, because if you want to see what happens, so they'll put 1 and 2 in the most popular titles.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah. It feels dumb, though, because then there's just a random middle of a Kraven story that if you're reading the second title, you haven't had the first bit to.
That's the fear. But that's why they plaster the cover with like part 3 of Kraven's Last Hunt. So it's like any reasonable reader's going to be like, oh, I've got to read bloody 1 and 2 now.
So were these all written by the same people?
Yes, written by the same people. So they at least kind of make it a cohesive story in that sense.
Who wrote it?
It was written by J.M. DeMatteis with...
they were not pulling their weight.
Well, they apparently wanted to write the Kraven story. So... Okay. And penciling by Mike Zeck, who was like the highest kind of billing.
Yeah.
Also got inker, Bob McLeod, and colorists, Mike Zeck again, and Ian Tetrault. So it seems that mainly it's DeMatteis and Zeck.
They were pulling their weight.
Oh, yeah. The art I really enjoyed. And
yeah.
The story I enjoyed to an extent. Like, I liked aspects of it.
What, to the extent that you like hearing the word grave and 2 weeks repeated for 5 pages?
Yes. It was a pretty grave story, I'll give you that. But I enjoyed it.
So the art.
Yeah, to a little bit on broad thoughts, this is like this is the biggest story of Kraven, who is the antagonist, one of the antagonists of Spider-Man. It's probably the only big story of his.
Yeah, because he's shit.
Yeah, so that might be the title of like the biggest Kraven story ever, and then in brackets like it's not that many Kraven stories.
No, it's the only Kraven story, but it's fine.
Apparently, originally it wasn't even meant to be Kraven. So apparently they were writing the story. It doesn't say who it was originally meant to be, but apparently the writer, DeMatteis, was just like, oh, I was writing the story. He already kind of had it blocked out. And then apparently he was just looking through, like in Marvel, you get like character Bibles and stuff, universe Bibles. And he was just having a look through, just having a flick through pages. And he found Kraven. And he described, as he was reading through like the little bio of Kraven, and he realized that he's Russian. And then this is a quote from him. He literally jumped to, it's like, for me, finding out he was of Kraven was Russian. So for me, a total Dostoevsky fanfic. The idea that Kraven was Russian and had the same tortured Russian soul that the great Dostoevsky characters had unlocked this door in my head, and suddenly I had a new understanding of this character. So basically, he just found out the nationality of the character and just went, oh, this famous writer.
I've read Dostoevsky's work.
Would you say very Kraven-esque?
No. Although... he wrote a book called The Doppelganger,
right? Which is interesting because Kraven's brother is the chameleon.
Really?
Yeah,
that's cool. Jesse Eisenberg was in a cinematic adaptation of The Doppelganger. I don't think it went anywhere, but it is literally about a dude who has a doppelganger who just like steps into his life,
right?
And it's really fucking existential and it's really fantastic. This is not as good as. This is I don't see the comparison between Kraven and a Dostoevsky character.
So you think this Marvel comic book writer has fallen short in his attempts to recreate the vibe of Dostoevsky in comic book form?
I think he was indulging in something that many people indulged in the 1980s, particularly wealthy artists. I'm implying that he was off his fucking tits on cocaine at the time, mate.
I mean, Kraven seems that way, so the influences come through in that way.
It was the 80s. Everyone was snorting blow, weren't they?
Yeah, everyone was doing it.
Yeah.
It was in the Coca-Cola, I think.
Maybe the 1880s. I'm not sure. I think they'd taken it out by the neon 80s.
Well, we were born in the 90s, so who knows what was going on before we came along.
Well, yeah, this is it. We weren't here to hold shit down, were we?
Exactly.
So the artwork.
Yes.
It's
crazy.
Fucking... it's like... So that... Right. Let's start at the most notable thing. The thing that I think any modern comic book reader would have questions about.
The colour?
No, what the fuck is going on with Spider-Man's costume?
Oh, right. So, yeah. This was a bit of an interesting thing.
For a minute, I thought it was like Venom Spider-Man.
Yeah, so that is what it's based on. So what happened was, this came out in 87.
Yeah.
I can't remember the year. I think it was 84 or a bit earlier. I don't have the exact year in front of me. But the original Secret Wars happened, right? characters all go to this other planet, battle world, and they have to battle out to save the universe or whatever. While Spider-Man's there in normal costume, he uses a 3D printer to print off a new costume like some of the other heroes have. Turns out Peter Parker has gone to the wrong bloody machine. But he goes to a machine that was holding a symbiote, which wasn't even a symbiote at this point, but it prints him a costume and it's black. And he's like, whoa, this is crazy. Interesting little thing. That black suit was actually a competition winner of a kid who designed, I think either the competition was to design a new Spider-Man costume, or he won a competition and the prize was he got to design a Spider-Man costume.
But it was one or the other.
Yeah, so it was made by a kid, and it was just, simple black, looked cool, or, classic 80s, like the grit of the 90s, early grit starting to come into play. But yeah, black suit Spider-Man, and then a few years after that, they do the symbiote storyline, and then which led to Venom. So this actually takes place in between that. So he's realized the symbiote was talking to him and he needed to get the suit off, realized it was making him more angry and feeding off his, darker emotions.
Before this or after?
Before this. I didn't know this. I didn't know if it was normal material or symbiote, but basically he gets it off, top of the church bell, sonic waves hurt the symbiotes, manages to get it off. So apparently after that, sometime after that, it finds Eddie Brock and becomes a character Venom. Apparently, what I didn't know was in between that, Spider-Man gets it off and then goes, "God, that bloody suit almost ruined my life, hurt my relationship with my loved ones, and thank God I managed to escape it." The black looked cool though, so I'm going to make a black suit out of normal material.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is him wearing a copy of the symbiote suit.
Yes.
Gonna be honest with you,
Looks cool.
looks pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably why they had the idea to do the story to make it a symbiote and went, that's a cool story, we should do that. And then when they did the story, they went, the suit did actually look cool though, so maybe we keep that.
So how long did Spider-Man look like this for then? Because this is not... So for reference, guys, if you're a comic book fan, you'll probably be aware of this. It's an entirely black suit with a white spider on the front.
Yes, very famous design, very classic design.
But one we've never really seen depicted outside of like this era of comic books.
I mean, we've seen it depicted, but not this accurate, not this comic accurate. So Spider-Man 3 by Sam Raimi just had the same costume of black, which looked cool in its own right, but was not this. And then Spider-Man 2, the game, we have basically same thing. Black suit Spider. That one, he was just like all black. There wasn't any of the ridges or the Spider-Man 3 costume just looked like it was dyed black.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2, the PlayStation game, looks like just a slick black, almost like sheen.
Yeah.
Was
a gimp suit.
a little bit like leather, but it looked, even more disgusting than a gimp suit. It looked organic.
Organic gimp suit.
Yes.
Oh, the gimp suit is talking to me.
I mean, it's telling you to do things you don't want to do.
Right, we need to get off the suit.
But the main point is he went, the black looked cool, made a material one, and I think there's an element in this comic and with the setting of following him being a more aggressive superhero for a bit because of the suit.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's still in the black, and people are like, Spider-Man, he was really getting on a bit there, he was really angry and stuff, and maybe that hasn't quite changed yet.
So, the artwork.
Yes.
It's very neon 80s. We haven't read a lot of this era of Marvel.
Not a lot, no.
But we have read some of this era of DC.
Yes. 80s DC, trying to think.
The Man Who Has Everything.
Yes, yeah. That might be the only one, I think.
No, we've read a couple. The Man Who Had Everything. I'm pretty sure we've read a Batman from that era as well.
Oh, Killing Joke, which I think is very unique. That was a very unique kind of comic.
But we've read a little bit of DC from the 80s.
A little bit.
And this is my first sort of 80s Spider-Man.
We had the Marvel Christmas thing, but that was like an anthology of different characters.
And that was 90s, wasn't it?
I think it was late 80s, I think.
Was it late 80s? It looks really cool.
Yes.
It looks really good. I don't know. I mean, again... I don't want to say it because I really love the current Marvel Ultimates art style. But I think this may be some of my favorite Marvel art I've ever seen. Is this comic known for having good art?
I think this era and this style is more known than the comic, if that makes sense. I think the comic is doing what was popular at the time.
So is this kind of part? Is this just from a really deep vein of really good comic book art?
I would say, with regards to Spider-Man specifically, that this is a follow-on from Todd McFarlane, who started the work on Spider-Man in the kind of mid to late 80s. He was the kind of next benchmark of like, here's what the style looks like now. Especially with Spider-Man, but that obviously, that was successful, bled into the other Marvel universe and comics in general.
Yeah.
But he was the kind of benchmark after Romita Sr., who had his style had kind of dominated, even if it changed slightly over the time, dominated from 60s to like mid 80s. Like,
because he started drawing Spider-Man in like 65 or something, didn't he?
Exactly. So the next
if I remember rightly, which I tend not to.
I mean, you and me both, brother. The next big change was Todd McFarlane, who did a really kind of anatomically correct while also adding muscles, if that makes sense. Like,
oh no, it's that era of comic books. Yeah. Remember when Deadpool was fucking stacked in the 90s?
Whereas Spider-Man pre that, Romita Sr., he was like what Olympic athletes look like in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like to now, normal people, like they look more normal. Whereas now Olympic athletes look like fucking silicon robots, like perfectly sculpted and shit. That's what happened in the kind of mid-80s.
Because Spider-Man here is donkey.
Yes.
He big.
There's also a lot of like walking on all four position and like web swinging. There's like McFarlane was really good at that kind of stuff. Like he made the movements look really dynamic.
Yeah. And I mean, again, this isn't Todd McFarlane, is it?
No, but that's why I had to check. I'll cut out in the edit, but that's why I checked what year, because I wanted to make sure this is after he popularized that style in the mid 80s.
Yeah.
So this being 87, it's like right in that cusp of like, oh, this style's really popular. Like, do that as well.
So the artwork is very neon 80s.
Yes, the color scheme is extremely 80s.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, it's just more vivid. I think
it's muscles on top of muscles.
Muscles on top of muscles, very vivid. It has a pulpy feel to it. Like there's a crisp, I can't explain it. Comic books are rendered in more detail now, and everything's a bit more crisp, whereas this stuff from the 80s looks fantastic, but it's almost like it's in soft focus, but it isn't.
Do you think that might be like a printing technology thing?
Well, I mean, part of it is that, of course, we're reading scans of old copies. And so they,
especially this beat. Well, I don't know about this because this is the 2002 like re-release trade paperback.
Dude, that's
so still a bit of time. Yeah.
If that was scanned,
actually, it might be
recently,
2022 even.
Right.
But like, I know what you mean. It's some kind of copy of the original in some way.
Yeah, because when we're reading modern comic books, we are reading a digital file that has been uploaded somewhere. But when we're reading this older stuff, often we're reading scans, aren't we? And so I think, that may be attributable to the way it's been scanned. I'd be really interested to know what the process of archiving these old comic books is like.
I mean, if you look at really old ones, you see there's a lot of like, just like blurs and stuff. Like some get remastered, so they proper like redo. Like someone will remake, like with using the original as a what do you call it, like a basis or a But some, like, they don't bother doing that. So the only one, as you say, is a scan of the original page. And you see, like, I think some of those 60s ones we looked at for, like, those would have been remade. But there's some old ones that don't get proper remade.
When we did the Action Comics one, and Detective Comics, was it?
Detective Comics like 3 or 4 or something.
They were scans.
Yes, because they had scans. Little like blurs or like darker parts of the pages.
You could see where they were yellowing around the pages in the corner, and it had the original adverts in it.
Yeah. And back then, they were just lucky to get a copy. Like that's the problem with comics back then, where like you bought it really cheap, read it, and binned it. Yeah. So the fact that they could just get one was like
to scan it.
Yeah. Like so it looks a bit scuffed. It's like we couldn't get any others, so that's why. Though even the companies themselves are saying nowadays they log even pre-internet and pre-digital scanning, they would have logged every one they sold out.
I imagine once they realised how much of a thriving grey market there was for their own stuff, they would have archived everything, wouldn't they?
But even back then, they just made it, sent it out, and didn't even bother. They'd be like, what about Action Comics #1? It's like, what? Like, who cares about that?
Who gives a fuck? Yeah. Who gives a fuck?
Which is why they became so valuable later in life.
Yeah, and this is it, isn't it? I imagine their archival practices are now really good, and in the 1930s, they probably didn't have very good archival practices. But no, I really like the art. Yeah. I found it really vivid, really enjoyable. It was the most enjoyable thing about this story for me.
Yeah, I think it's compare, especially now looking back, like storytelling, like tropes have changed over time.
Oh my god, it's so dated.
But the art, I know what you mean. Like you can look back at it in more of an objective way and just be like, and more admire like for what it was at the time rather than the storytelling practices.
Yeah, totally. And again, when we get onto the story, I think I definitely have some comments there. To redeem it.
Yes.
You know, there's a lot wrong with the story, and there's a lot that I found just sort of drab, but in an awful, overly dramatic way. But the artwork kind of fucks throughout.
I think there's a lot of storytelling done with the artwork. So even more than just making everything aesthetically nice looking. Yeah. There's little parts like, so for the spoiler for the rest of the story, but it's fucking from the 80s or whatever, you see Kraven wearing the Spider-Man suit. Yeah. And you instantly can see it's not Peter Parker. And I thought like...
And Mary Jane can instantly see it's not Peter Parker.
So that's like the story. But even just the visual, you look at him, it's like his chest is way too big. Like it's definitely Kraven. So they could have far too easily have just taken a template of Spider-Man, put it there, and then when he takes the mask off, just put Kraven's head on there. Like that would have saved them time.
But they made him bigger.
Exactly. They spent the time to actually tell the story using the art.
Yeah, the artwork's really good and it's really clean. And as you say, everything like ties together and everything looks right. Weirdly, minimal jank.
Yeah.
I was expecting so much more jank going into this, but everything is where it should be.
So I think we've had interesting conversations regarding jank and versus style and that kind of stuff. I would posit that here, I like all the face and stuff, and I think there's certain situations, like I'm looking at a couple pages now where it's a bit sad and somber, and like faces are very appropriate facial expressions. Yeah. Some of the more mental parts of it, there are crazier facial expressions, especially from Kraven. Like he's the main guy to go by that. Some of his faces look crazy and almost jank, but I think the style, it suits the style.
Yeah, I didn't notice any jank. My jank meter tends to be a bit more sensitive than yours.
Yeah, and I think jank is kind of subjective, isn't it? Yeah. Like, but this is what I'm saying.
It's a term that I've invented.
Yeah. Well, I've heard other people. Since you've said it, I've heard other people using it, and I don't think that's from our influence as a podcast.
I mean, I'm pretty sure it was one of my artist friends who first used the term for like janky art. Oh, it's a bit janky.
Yeah, but I think can you see what I'm saying? Where a certain style can a certain style can allow jank.
Yeah, in a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you have here. It's like sometimes Kraven is normal looking, and then sometimes in some of the fight or like the crazy scenes, his mouth is like hinged open, a bit larger, and his face has become more narrow, and his eyes like are ridiculously wide. And again, perfectly suiting the time. The setting is in. So I think this reward, and kind of like it does it a bit in The Bloody Killing Joke.
The Bloody Killing Joke. But that is
like, the Irish version. Killing Bloody Killing or whatever it's called. But like Joker in that, sometimes he's like normal looking in his bat, whatever. And then it cuts to like when he's coming out of the sewer with the acid stuff, vat of acid he's fallen into. That's like a really fucked up looking face for how he looked previously. Yeah. And that could be, if it wasn't such like iconic splash page and appropriate to the context of the story, that could be considered jank. Yeah. Where it just looks so much weirder than he looked for the rest of the time.
Yeah, makes sense. But no, I didn't find it janky at all.
I did not find it janky. I enjoyed how weird it got at points.
Yeah, totally. And to be honest with you, that's what redeemed it for me. So there were two moments. I'm getting straight into story.
I was just saying, the only other thing I really enjoyed, it's constantly raining through this story. And there's something, I realized it. There's people have like certain things that just work for them and you can't explain why. I love like lines of rain in comic book. I don't know why that's the thing.
We've realized what gets Ryan's dick twitching, and it's rain. Do you know what, mate?
A more PC friendly, a more PG friendly. Like I'm like Marge with the potato in Simpsons. She goes, I just think they're neat.
I just think they're neat.
Yeah. I just think it's neat when it's got like all those lines drawn across, and it's like a cool effect, you know.
As a British,
we have to like rain because otherwise we'd go mental.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is, mate, I didn't notice it.
What, the rain?
Yeah, because it's fucking normal that it would be raining, right? Like, that just makes sense.
But this looks like a cool... But like, if rain outside looked like lines in the sky.
Do you want life to imitate art, Ryan?
Yeah, don't you?
I mean, life does imitate art sometimes.
I want rain to look like lions. I want Pokemon to be real. That's
Oh, brother. Oh my God. If Pokemon were real, I would quit my job so fast and just be a roaming Pokemon trainer.
You'd be one of those guys on the road who, like, the trainer comes across, like, check out my collection, let's battle, like that kind of guy.
Yeah, I'd be that. I'd be an NPC.
Because you have a look that's like, they always look very distinctive, don't they?
Do I don't look distinctive.
I mean, you don't look like, what's the male version of, like, Sarah Plain and Tall? You don't look like Joe Bloggs. Like, you're not like a guy in a lineup. Put it this way, if you want what's the Guess Who game?
Yes.
There's like several features of you I could narrow you down very quickly.
Okay, fair enough. This is news
do you
to
not
me.
agree? Am I saying something you didn't know?
I'm a very normal-looking anodyne man.
Right, most men don't have long hair. Most men don't have a beard as big as yours. Those
Yeah.
are two off the top of my head, right?
I find it really funny that most of the audience have never seen me.
I know.
So this is the first description of my appearance.
They're painting a mental image in their head.
It's like, so Joe, I mean, like big booming voice, long
Yes.
hair, massive beard.
Yeah. If this was like a
Are
Guess
you
Who
podcasting
game,
with Brian Blessed?
I've said this exact thing before. Isn't Brian Blessed your dad?
I think Brian Blessed's a bit old to be my dad. I think Brian Blessed would have to be my grandfather.
Okay. So is Brian Blessed your grandfather? Is that what you're
Wouldn't
saying?
that be cool? Wouldn't that be cool?
Oh, yeah. Sitting on his knee and he's like, let me tell you a story.
What's
All right. So back to,
wrong with big tomatoes? Anyway.
all right, back to comic. Yeah, I like rain.
right,
I like rain lines.
So there are two moments in this comic that I thought were really impactful.
Yes.
Sincerely, two moments. So Kraven kills Peter Parker.
Yes.
Let's just get it out there. There is
Peter
a moment.
Parker died and he never came back after
Never
the
came
story.
back after that. So Peter Parker is really impacted by the death of one of his rogues gallery.
Yes. Guy who played a hobgoblin, even though it doesn't... I thought it was odd. It didn't mention it here.
Yeah.
Normally Marvel is very quick to be like, after the death of Hobgoblin, also known as Ned Leeds, who died this way, and, normally they give all that.
Look, right, I'm trying to actually do some plot stuff and you're interrupting me. I'm trying to do the thing you always want me to do.
Oh, you're telling the story?
Well, I'm talking through some major plot points so I can talk about why I felt they were impactful and what they did really well.
Okay, floor is yours.
So throughout this issue, we're seeing Peter Parker kind of grieve one of his rogues gallery because even though he's, put him in prison multiple times or he's always catching him and fighting with him, Peter Parker's still like at his core a sweet human, and I think this is really trying to get that across.
Kind of with added context of having had the symbiote suit storyline just before this.
And so we see throughout the issue somebody digging a grave. And I think the natural assumption is that it is this Joe, what's his name?
Ned Leeds.
Ned Leeds.
Oh, or the guy, the mobster who died in the beginning. I think probably more Ned Leeds is the Hobgoblin.
Yeah, so we think it's Ned Leeds' grave that's being dug. And then finally, Kraven has his fight with Peter Parker, killing him, and we realise that the grave that we've been watching be dug for the entire issue is Peter's grave. And they have a funeral. They have a fucking funeral for him.
Kraven and the guys who work for him.
Yeah, Kraven and his guys have like a funeral for Peter Parker and they bury him, right? And that, for me, was a really fun, interesting narrative device. And I thought it was really well played out across the page. And I think it set the scene really well. This was my favourite issue out of the bunch.
Okay.
I found the mid-game bothersome.
Oh, with Vermin?
Yeah,
I found Vermin.
I liked Vermin for reasons that we'll get into.
Okay.
But I found the middle kind of bulk of the comic a bit annoying, if I'm being entirely frank with you.
Mary Jane looking for Spider-Man.
Again, probably one of my more enjoyable moments.
Okay.
Even though very dark.
Yeah.
Very dark for like not comic book real life shit that happens reasons.
Yeah.
Some blokes tried to R-word Mary Jane in the street. Which is super fucked up. Like, I don't know why that needed to be there, but it was also quite potent, I mean, it paints a story, it kind of paints a picture of how dangerous the streets are and what she's willing to go through to look for him. But I think there was so that one issue where Peter Parker dies, and the whole issue is about death and grief and
mortality, existentialism.
Mortality, but also this kind of unusual grief where it's like, he didn't fucking like that guy, but he was grieving for him because that's our relationship with death as humans. And even the death of somebody that we openly revile can affect us in that way, right?
And he does quite explicitly think about his own mortality in response as well.
Yeah, and so we see Peter Parker brood in a way that we don't often see him brood. He's not really a brooding character, is he?
He gets sad at points, like, not brooding like Batman.
Yeah.
Like, Spider-Man's like, oh, shucks.
But he is quite brooding here, isn't he?
Yes, more so.
And then I think playing that, intersplicing the entire book with that gravedigging scene, and then having the reveal that it is Peter Parker's grave you've watched being dug.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really cool narrative device. I thought that whole issue was just laid out really well. And then the visuals, because we don't necessarily see Peter die as such, do we? We just see him being buried.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really cool choice. And I really liked the way that they called back to that, because they put Kraven, I don't know if you noticed this, they put Kraven in the same pose when he shot himself.
Yeah, yeah.
So at the end, that kind of very upright pose with a down-tipped head in shadow, that's the same pose he was in at Peter's funeral.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought that was a really nice circular moment. And again, it's that kind of neat and tidy, quite simplistic storytelling that comic book writers went in for at the time. But it's nice when they do that. The fucking middle, though, Ryan.
With Vermin.
Well, I mean, I thought Rat Gollum was fun.
He was fun.
If I'm being honest with you.
His narrative monologue was like kind of interesting to follow, where like jumps between like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, like Gollum, literally.
It's literally Gollum, isn't it? I don't know how they got away with just straight up putting Gollum in a comic book and not calling it Gollum.
Because at this point, they'd only been in book form and no one gave a shit.
Well,
you could rip off a book in a comic because most people hadn't read the book.
Well, this is it, though. I would argue that a lot of comic book fans in the 1980s probably would have been familiar with The Lord of the Rings.
Familiar with, but not read to the extent of, like, recognizing a character model in another form.
Do you think, because The Lord of the Rings was endearingly popular among nerds?
Oh, yeah, like, references to it, and, like, nowhere near to the level of, I think, after the films came out.
Yeah.
But there's also, because, like, I haven't read them, I don't know. I just hear this from
Have you not read The Lord of the Rings?
Of course I haven't. You think I've read a book? But...
Have you read The Hobbit?
No.
You've not read the fucking Hobbit?
Most people haven't.
No. Ryan, The Hobbit
is
like...
If you polled people just in the world...
The Hobbit is one that, like, parents read to their kids as bedtime stories.
If you polled people our age and asked them how many of their parents read them The Hobbit as a kid... I think you'd be like less than 1%.
I think people our age are the last generation where we would have been getting stuff like that because the Harry Potter books became
we
so
got
popular.
read Harry Potter, yeah.
I didn't get read Harry Potter, though.
Well, there you go. Like, that's even the most popular, and you didn't get that. So it goes to show something that's the Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. Again, I don't know as much, but in terms of just like how people talk about it through time, yeah, it's one of those things that like hardcore readers seek out. Because all I hear from people who read books is how dense and difficult to get into the Lord of the Rings books are. No, but the Lord of the Rings generally. So the Hobbit kind of falls, people assume the same of that in being in the same kind of group. And
the Lord of the Rings books are really fucking good.
But they're not easy reads, are they? And that's not just down to length. That is
so you would argue that a 1980s comic book audience wouldn't broadly be aware of Gollum?
I think a 90s, this is pure speculation, based on how people talked about, like older people talk about what it was like being fans of it before the films came out, right? I think comic book fans generally would know, some would have read it, absolutely, but not enough that most people would catch a reference like this, I don't think. The ones who read it would have caught the reference, obviously.
Because this is very obviously a Gollum ripoff. Like, it can't not be.
But that's comic books, like... Take from what's popular and redo it in this other way.
Yeah.
But I think most comic book fans, they might know the reference to Gandalf and Frodo and like those kind of names. I think Gollum they would know of, like creepy guy, creature used to be a guy consumed with the ring, that sort of stuff. I don't think they're gonna, unless they've read it, and I think most haven't, I don't think they're gonna know the specific personality, like dual personality, fighting between them kind of thing. And also just the posture. I mean, again, what's really interesting is that it even looks like Gollum, even though we hadn't had a visual, well, I mean, we had visual depictions of Gollum at this point. Yeah. But then there were, I mean, in fairness, mate, there was the Lord of the Rings cartoon in the 80s. I had no idea that existed. It did. Fair enough. I would,
mate. You should watch it. It's a thing.
It's
a thing. It's kind of good.
We should see if there's Lord of the Rings comic book and do that one day. But
right,
it might be.
We're not doing that.
Okay,
that's just not happening. Like, you can't take something that
you want to see a Marvelified Lord of the Rings comic book.
I want nothing less, Ryan. I want nothing less, mate.
I will say with Vermin, I think his posture and general how he acts, creepiness, that kind of stuff, that could be equated to, well, he's a guy who's part rat. So
yeah, no, totally. But again, so I didn't love this middle section of the comic book because it relied on repetition a lot.
I liked the repetition as a story kind of device. As you say, with the grave digging, like it kept cutting back to the grave digging.
Right. Cutting back to the grave digging is one thing. But then when Peter breaks out of the grave.
Well, leading up to that, you then having cut to the soil on top of the grave with a rat on it, and then the rat gets replaced by a spider, and then eventually breaks out, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so those little like moments are cool and they're interesting, and they're the kind of things that you could miss if you were just skimming it.
Yeah,
but once we meet Vermin, all we hear is underground is safe. This is sleepy or rats.
They could have cut a lot out of Vermin and still got the same result for the story,
and they could have cut a lot out of Peter. I didn't need to hear 2 weeks, grave, buried 2 weeks for an entire fucking issue.
I mean, it's reasonable someone would react like that if they were buried alive for 2 weeks.
It is, but it gives... No, I'm sorry. You can't devote an entire issue to 3 words. 2 weeks, grave, 2 weeks, grave, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, grave. Every fucking panel for an issue. It was grating.
I mean, for me, it just kind of sold the severity of it. Because for me as a comic...
Did it, though? Did it actually?
For me as a comic book reader, and general, like, fantasy stuff, like sci-fi fantasy stuff like this, there is a unfortunately common thing of horrific things happening to characters, and then it completely losing more modern this is, losing the effectiveness because they go, oh, this horrible thing's just happened to me. Right, better suck up and get on with it and beat the bad guy. And then they have a happy ending. And it's like canonically like an hour since this like horrific thing just happened to them. Yeah. And they're like, well, it's all sorted now and it's happy ending. And I'm getting like Bond at the end of a lot of Bond films. Like he went through like horrific shit in some of those stories. At the end, he's like, well, I got the girl and everything's fine. I'm talking about the films, not the books.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't really speak to the films.
No. But that happened a lot in the films where he like went through like this horrific stuff. And then at the end, he's like, well, I got the girl. And he makes the quip about probably about their name. And it's probably like a misogynistic like joke or something. But you know what I mean? Like, and he's just fine now. And that's common with comic book stuff as well. And I appreciate that they will take the time to be like, look how fucking crazy he's gone now. Yeah, because he was buried alive for 2 weeks. Like he is going to be obsessing over it and crazy about it. And like, and I can see your point of like, as a read, like as it taking in a bit of fiction.
I think it's a cheap way of doing it.
Yeah. But I think
if they want to get across something existential and powerful, they can do so using more words than just grave 2 weeks, 2 weeks, grave. It just grated on me.
I
found it grating. I found it really grating.
I think it's a personal like mileage may vary per person on like how you find it.
Yeah,
I didn't even notice it was that repetitive. It's only now you pointed it out. I go, oh yeah, I guess it was.
It was an entire issue of it.
Yeah. But it was such a quick read as well. Like I didn't spend very long on any issue because I just kind of got like the story very quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean it's quite paint by numbers, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's why like I didn't even notice the repetition in that speech specifically because I just went through it. Because around that time, was it Kraven is fighting Vermin or he's just fought Vermin? So there was something else going on in there, which again, not the most exciting plot points.
No,
but enough was happening there. It wasn't just Peter Parker. Focused on him just repeating himself for like an entire issue.
Skipping towards the ending.
I was going to point out the panel layout and stuff.
Oh, okay,
like,
cool.
As you say about the repetition of like the long kind of long middles that keep repeating. There's also I thought was really interesting, the kind of extra inner monologue that characters had.
Yeah, right. So I assumed, wrongly, actually, that Peter's was his symbiote.
I assumed the exact same thing.
But it's not his symbiote.
No. And I only realized that once Mary Jane had her. So, and that's when I went, I should Google this and look at what happened.
Although I imagine because of the symbiote, people had just become quite accustomed to Peter Parker having this interior monologue, so they kept it running even though he didn't have the symbiote anymore.
Maybe. I don't know if they did this technique before or after this comic, but one thing that I kind of interpreted it as was like a subconscious primal kind of narrative, because it's all like short one words, and it's like the most like pressing thought in someone's head. So in Spider-Man, you first hear when Kraven's hunting him and he's like, he's got a gun, like gun, rifle, gun, like that. Again, that repetition, but it's interspersed with his normal front of the brain, front of the mind, conscious thinking, you know? And then when Mary Jane started doing it, I was like, oh, it's not symbiote then. But hers is like, he's dead. Like, he's dead. He's dying, so he's dead.
And, I mean,
but again,
okay.
interspersed with her going, he's probably fine. Like that. And that did get across to me, like that feeling of you're trying to keep bay the worst thoughts. And I appreciate that.
I didn't. And I didn't hate the interior monologue here because it was pulling weight. I must admit.
It didn't overdo it.
No. Well, I mean, you got something in every panel, but I didn't dislike it, and I sort of knew going into it as soon as I read the first couple pages where Kraven is monologuing about his Russian heritage and the revolution and all that shit. And I was like, right, okay. I mean, I get it. It's the 80s in America. The moment, again, for our younger listeners, there was something called the Cold War. And this is where Russia and America were propping up other countries.
Nothing like what's happening now.
Well, yeah, I mean, so essentially, Russia and America really wanted to have a war against each other, but they also both had nukes, and they knew it was a terrible fucking idea. And so they went around the globe propping up either Russia setting up communist dictatorships in countries, or America kind of bombing democracy into countries the way that they do. You know how the Americans will shoot and bomb democracy into a country?
Look out. Democracy's here. America. Yeah,
but it meant that they were sort of funding all these proxy wars around the globe. And there were moments when the Cold War very nearly got hot, the most notable of which being the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yep. And that time when the Russian sonar was mistakenly picking up missiles.
Yes.
And that only got resolved because one guy in Russia was like, let's leave it for a bit and just see what happens. Because I think this is fault. Like, I don't think the Americans are fired.
Yeah. But anyway, so if an American comic book, if a piece of American media at the time gives you a Russian character, that is coded as a bad guy. You don't see Russian good guys in American media from the 80s, is what I'm suggesting.
Yes, yeah.
And so, like, having that whole monologue about, oh, you're honorable Russians, that shit, kind of groundbreaking for the time.
And he looked down on the post-Tsar, like, era.
Yeah. And so,
like,
again,
there's no honor anymore.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, the Tsarist period in Russia ended at the start of the 20th century. And that is where we get the USSR developed and we get communist Russia. And America's issue is with communist Russia. Old world Russia, to be honest with you, the Americans hadn't really interacted with Russia that much before. So before World War I and II, the Americans hadn't really interacted with Russia. And obviously Russia was on varying different sides of those two conflicts. But more recently, Russia had been a sort of reluctant ally of the US. And so America had to interact with Soviet Russia. And I don't think the Americans ever particularly liked interacting with communist Russia.
No, or any kind of communism at all.
Because if you walk up to somebody in the UK and be like, hey, you're a bit of a communist, people are like, yeah, I'm a bit socialist, I'm a bit of a lefty, you know what I mean? Do that in America, they'll fucking shoot you.
Less
Call somebody a commie in America, they will shoot you on sight.
It's been overdone now, because like, what's it, the most recent election, Trump's like, Kamala's a left-wing communist, and all the actual left-wing communists like, we fucking wish, like, gee, that'd be great, wouldn't it? No one buys that now.
Comrade!
Yeah. I wish, comrade. I tell you,
I'm just giving, because obviously, you know, I imagine some of our listeners might be a bit younger, or not necessarily just know the historical context for this. But in the 80s, putting a Russian villain in something is quite a charged, loaded thing.
Yes.
And actually having a Russian villain who is as honorable as Kraven, because one of the things we get at the end of this book is that Kraven fucking kills Peter Parker, and he gets to the end of the book and he's like, well, you know I will leave you alone now, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's like,
He's done what he needed to do.
Yeah, like, I defeated you, I bested you, you have come back, you've given me a good scrap, I'm going to leave this alone now. And Peter's like, yeah, I bet he will. And, like, it's kind of this interesting nod to, like, oh, well, actually, even though he's a dirty Rushski, he's a dirty Rushski that loves the Tsar and pre-communism.
Yeah.
So he is honourable and he is trustworthy. And it's like, are you trying to say something here, guys?
I think Kraven's an interesting one because, again, he'll gladly jump out of the bushes and tackle you to the ground and stab you and mount you on the wall, but he won't lie to you. And that's the difference. He'll cause you bodily harm, but he won't like mess with your sense of self or who you are as a person.
And so I thought that ending where he sort of says, oh, well, I'll just leave you alone then. And then goes and offs himself because his work here is done. It's like, it's interesting. If I'd got this ending in a modern comic book, I would be screaming into this microphone right now. I would be screaming bloody murder about how hokey and terrible and it doesn't make sense with the characters. But here it's kind of like, yeah, but it is very 80s. And here I kind of go, yeah, this is the perfect ending for this story. It is the perfect ending for this story.
I think what's interesting at this point in like comic book storytelling techniques, like one thing they had to try and resolve is how do you do anything other than the superhero beating the villain without the villain killing the superhero? Like, how many ways can you do that, really? And I think this is a famous example of one of the ways where Kraven, who had tried to kill Spider-Man in the past and been bested so many times, it's a little creative solution here where he goes, well, his goal here isn't to kill Spider-Man, even though it looks like he does, and we play with that, that look and effect. It wants to replace Spider-Man and prove that he could be a better Spider-Man than Spider-Man. And I think that's interesting. I just think it's neat.
How did you feel about the sort of times when Kraven was Spider-Man?
I thought it was a fun kind of like that is a common thing, not even common, but that has happened more since then of like people being Spider-Man. I mean, they did it with Batman. They tried to replace Batman with Jean Val, whatever his name is, who was Azrael.
Doesn't Superman sometimes turn up as Batman?
Like once or twice, like in a quirky kind of like, Batman's busy and he asked me to replace him for like a issue or so. Yeah. Like not as significant.
So I thought, and then because didn't Doc Ock?
Yes.
Doc Ock was in Peter Parker's brain, wasn't he?
Yeah. In the last like 10 years, like relatively recent compared to this.
So Doc Ock's done it. But is this the first time?
Maybe. For all we know.
So I thought it was really cool. And really, so one of my favorite bits of the comic book are the bits where Kraven's in the Spider-Man suit.
Yeah. And he's constantly reaffirming himself. He's like, look how much better I am as Spider-Man. Everyone's like, dude, I think you're kind of obsessed.
What's interesting is, while he's being Spider-Man, he hunts bad guys. Like, he's not out there doing crime.
And he's broken it down so objectively and so like scientifically, where it's like, right, Vermin, I've tracked him. Spider-Man needed help from Captain America to beat him. Yeah. So if I do it by myself, I'm officially better than Spider-Man. Like he's really broken it down of like the basics.
Yeah, and I think it's fun because that is absolutely how comic book nerds talk about this kind of stuff sometimes.
Do you like
actually.
Do you like Vermin calling Captain America Captain Flag?
I did.
Like, is it Captain
I really
Flag
liked
it.
It's
probably Captain Flag.
And then he says Captain A and then nothing. I really wanted to see Cap.
Yeah, but then that would have that it's better in the story, Tim, to be referred to afterwards.
Yeah, although was there actually a fight between?
I don't know for sure, but I just assume yes, because that this is the time of like real attention to detail, continuity.
Yeah,
where they would just include everything that happened, even to a detriment.
So one of the things that story beat really made me do is go, I wonder what other comics looked like at the time. So I definitely want to have a look at just some big Marvel heavy hitters from the 80s. I just think
this is one of the biggest.
Yeah, and I get why this was so popular. And then did they at the time, after these issues had come out, re-release it as a trade paperback? Or were they not really doing that so much at the time?
I think a while after, because this is one of those ones where I think at the time people don't realize how good it was compared to the rest. It's only when you're kind of a bit further. Bear in mind, like a year before this, Watchmen came out. And even that took a bit of time for people to go, do you remember Watchmen? Like how great that was. Like maybe that was the best comic ever. So I think people need a bit of time away.
Yeah.
Like the comics I'm reading now, like like some of the good ones I'm reading could, in 10 years' time, people go, actually, that was like the best Daredevil story ever. Like, but when you're in it, you don't see that kind of bigger picture comparison as much.
I would be surprised if people don't come away from some of this Ultimate stuff and go,
oh, yeah,
fuck, this is special.
But then they felt the same way about the first Ultimate Universe, and then it fell off a cliff like halfway through.
Yeah, I know. They can only disappoint me now.
Yes,
with that.
I think people are just hoping for the best.
And just fucking holding on and going on for the ride, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just interested as to what comics were like in the 80s now.
I mean, defined by kind of eras, this is literally the bridge. This sounds dumb to say, but I think it is accurate. It's the bridge between pre-80s and the 90s. And by that, I mean, I know, but hear me out.
Is the 80s the bridge between the 70s and the 90s, right?
Yes, and I'll tell you
why. That's
why.
a fucking hot take, mate.
I'll tell you for
That's
why.
a hot take.
The 90s was the dark, gritty era, right?
Yeah, right.
I think there's comics like this one in the 80s that you could see that change happening.
So what you're saying is
60s series were like golden era / silver era, and it was very much a comics code authority, can't do too much.
What
Joker can't kill people,
is,
so he has to use toxin instead, which is way worse.
There's certain moments. Oh yeah,
we
have a popular thought about that. There's moments where comics start to get a bit grittier, right?
Yes.
And this is what you're saying is that actually it's comic books like these where they start to introduce a bit more of that gritty stuff.
And then the 90s was full, way too much.
Yeah, and then kind of in the noughties they toned it back a bit and got to where we're at now.
Yeah, and you could look at something like this, the success of a story like this, and then have comics and creators and even the publishers going, oh, people love like dark, gritty storylines, like Watchmen and this coming out and Dark Knight Returns. And then in the 90s, it was just way too much.
I think, so going back to the overarching story theme, you mentioned Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
I can kind of see him groping for Dostoevsky here. Because there is an existentialism to Dostoevsky.
Do you think you would have picked up if I hadn't mentioned it?
No.
Fair enough.
Definitely. No, I wouldn't have made the link between Dostoevsky's very particular and chilling brand of existentialism and Peter Parker going, grave, 2 weeks.
So would it be fair to call this the like superhero shenanigans version of Dostoevsky?
No.
Oh.
Well, I mean, you can if you want.
I'm allowed to.
You can for the title, mate. Okay. Like if that's the title of the episode that gets people in.
Some clicks.
But I can see now that the writers were groping for that, though.
Yes.
I can see that they were groping for this kind of grim existentialism. I don't necessarily think this is the comic book where we found it. I'm sure that there are comic books where we have reached that level of existentialism. I don't necessarily think we've done it here, but I can see them going for it. And I think it's kind of cool to see that stuff kind of starting to come into comic books because, as you say, before this, comic books were very campy and were very kitsch. Even, I mean, we've not really done much from the 1970s, but we've looked at a little from the 40s. We've looked at a little from the 60s.
Yeah.
We've looked at some other mainstream stuff from the 1980s.
The tone is very much well, we'll save the day in the end. Ah, shucks.
Yeah, exactly that. Whereas this, I mean, it has the right level of grit. So there's wacky existentialism, and there's sort of the weird shit happening with Vermin.
There's Kraven just happening to turn up at the exact right time to save MJ. And you're like, all right, I know, come on.
But they needed for MJ to look at him and go, that's not Peter.
Yes.
Which she did, and I thought that was cool. So it led to a cool moment. It led to a interesting story beat. But Kraven fucking there in shadow with a rifle in his mouth at the end of this is an evocative image.
Yes.
I think if you took a casual comic book consumer who had been around in the 80s just buying comic books and showed them that panel, they'd go, Kraven Spider-Man.
I think the 80s was the decade for comics of pushing against censorship.
Yeah.
Not for any meaning, not for any morals or stance or anything like that. Purely financial.
Yeah, totally.
But I think this, because the Comics Code Authority that was introduced in the 60s, where apparently 50s comics and early 60s were quite violent. They weren't as grotesquely violent, but there were like dark themes. Like there was like a lot of westerns and like war comics, stuff like that, where people died. We've
never really delved in, because did you notice when we started reading Action Comics 1 and Detective Comics, there was a really rich vein of westerns and war comics.
Yeah, they were popular back then.
That we've never really delved into.
And there were like dark topics in there.
Oh, yeah.
But then the Comics Code Authority was a response to like right-wing Christian groups who were like, our children are reading this filth and are being affected, and, you know, led to all that stuff. So the comics volunteered to join the Comics Code Authority as like a advertising thing, basically, of like, oh no, it's all safe, you can still buy it for your kids and all that.
Do you think that's potentially why they moved away from the westerns and war stories?
I think they're just less popular. Like those stories.
Well, but ultimately, if you have a sanitized western, it's not very interesting, because the Old West was about shooting and raping.
But Western films had the same decline as well. I think the problem
I'm just curious as to how much the Comics Code Authority contributed to superhero stories being this sort of campy, kitschy, safe thing.
Like 100% almost.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That, again, you know, limitation is always the mother of invention. And actually, they were limited as to how much violence they could put on the page. So they made their heroes colourful and gave them these sort of interesting methods of fighting that didn't require a gun. Like, shooting a web at somebody is non-lethal.
I think that was more of a traversal thing at first, like swinging through the streets.
Yeah.
But then, like, those things will come to the forefront. It's like, how is he going to disarm the guy without punching him in the face?
Yeah.
Oh, he shoots his web. Like, then that becomes a very popular image that people associate with Spider-Man.
Because the 1960s, we can't sort of. It's hard to talk about the 1960s without talking about art and culture, because the 1960s was all about art and culture.
And then would you say the 70s was the right-wing censorship rebuttal to that? Like,
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the 1960s in America were also deeply violent. You know, you have, I mean, in the span of JFK gets shot in 64, Martin Luther King gets shot in 68, Bobby Kennedy gets shot in 68, and the most violent civil rights protests happen in sort of Chicago and places like that in 1968, as do the most violent protests against Nam. I mean, 68 is the year that LBJ steps down. Like, LBJ decides he can't be president anymore, and we get Nixon.
Yeah, that was dark time.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nixon is kind of a response to, so, you know, there was this huge unrest about NAM and civil rights in the 1960s, and then Nixon gets in essentially on a basis of law and order. His platform is, I'm going to make the streets safe, law and order, law and order, law and order. And so, yeah, the 70s kind of politically in the States was a response to all of the unrest that happened in the 1960s.
And I'm guessing the Christian right-wing groups would have felt emboldened by Nixon to be like, well, we want our comic books to be safe and Christian as well now.
Hugely, hugely. Like, it had a lasting impact on American politics.
And speaking of unhinged individuals like Nixon, see the great segue.
Well, nicely done.
Kraven, what I really did enjoy was how crazy he was depicted.
Yeah.
And normally, like, we see that a lot. Villains are introduced and they're shown, like, this is how crazy they are. Sometimes they'll just be randomly violent, or they're talking to themselves. Very generic, like, things I've seen a lot. Never have I ever seen a villain depicted as so unhinged as to be naked in a room fighting taxidermied animals.
Yeah.
Not even real animals. He doesn't think they're real. He is literally naked fighting stuffed panthers and bears, and he's like doing poses in front of them. Like, this is page 1.
Yeah, this is like the opening. This is where we're introduced to Kraven, and you are right.
I loved it. Like, I loved that breathtaking, refreshingly different of like, Kraven's a bit unhinged now. How unhinged? Well, he's punched the head of a stuffed bear that was his own. Like, he's set up this room to do it. And you genuinely feel like, Spider-Man, I think you're in trouble.
This guy's fucking weird, man.
This isn't normal, like, I'll hunt the spider. Like, he's unhinged. It's crazy. I was really enjoying it. And then he's in a room naked again. He's always naked. Unless, respectfully to him, when he's out and about, he's got his clothes on. When he's at home, he's instantly, he's one of those.
he's one of those.
Kit off as soon as he's in the door. Like, he's out, he's most comfortable. Fair
Yeah.
enough. He's in a room covered in spiders, eating spiders. Again, hugely unhinged.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that one makes a little more sense because he's in a very loose use of that term. But he's like, I need to become the spider. I need to take in the spider to become the spider. And you're like, I get how in your logic that makes sense. Like, fair enough. Don't see how fighting the stuffed animals at the beginning was giving you any help at all.
He's into it.
Yeah.
He just likes it.
But I just, that again, and I'd same with you. If this was like a modern comic, I'd be like, this is too camp. This is too crazy.
But it's from the 80s,
From the 80s, I'm like, this is perfect. Like, exactly what we need.
It was that moment that made me go, yeah, there was a lot of coke about in the 80s, wasn't there? Like, people were fucking high.
Kraven, part of Kraven's thing, I don't know if it is briefly mentioned, but he takes in a lot of like plant potions and stuff. Because he was born like 70, 80 years ago, I think, from this point. So he's obviously extended his life through all this stuff. Maybe there was a bit of that coca plant in that mix.
Absolutely.
What have you got in there? It's like, I've got like the plant herb from Black Panther, and I've got like some vibranium in my armor, and I'm smoking that as well. And I've got this weird plant from Doctor Strange, whatever. And there's a bit of cocaine in there.
Yeah, so
a little bit of cocaine.
Good
as well.
old-fashioned Colombian marching powder.
Yeah. I think Kraven's one of those people who doesn't need cocaine.
No.
If anything, it calms him down.
It has the reverse effect, like an ADHD.
Yes. That was probably my favorite aspect of this entire comic.
I honestly think I would love to see a modernized version of Kraven.
Oh yeah, he's been back. Yeah,
has he been back?
He was dead for a bit. Again, I've mentioned this in previous episodes.
Well, yeah, he fucking shot himself, Ryan.
Yes, characters die, but they don't stay dead.
Yeah,
and that's the problem. Apparently, soon after this, the same creators did bring him back as a ghost in a later Spider-Man.
Nice.
It's like Spider-Man. There's no Spider. I died in clothes, and now I'm constantly clothed. It's hell. This is my nightmare. There's no stuffed animals here.
There's no stuffed animals, and I have to wear pants.
Yeah. So
So what overall? How did we feel about this one?
Campy fun. Campy. The best compliment I think I give to it is it's dark and campy.
Yeah, right. Isn't it
that's
just
an odd mix, and it does it well.
I think it's reaching for something it doesn't quite get. I think it's reaching for that kind of
a lofty goal for a comic book.
Yeah, but what it achieves is something unique and interesting. I think there are a couple of really powerful, pivotal moments in this story that are worth the price of admission. Most notably, Peter Parker going to his grave.
Peter Parker picked a peck of pickled peppers.
Peter going to his grave. The first sort of moments of watching Kraven do hero work as Spider-Man, and then Kraven shooting himself are all just phenomenal story beats, laid out on the page beautifully. It has its moments.
You could say that.
It certainly has its moments where I think things become a bit overblown, and the attempts at reaching that sort of heady existentialism don't quite land for me. But again, that is as somebody who has read some pretty fucking existential literature.
Yeah.
Like, I've read Dostoevsky. I've read what's it called? French Bloke, The Metamorphosis. I've read Kafka's Metamorphosis, which is about as existential as it gets.
Yeah.
I've read like the Amazing Shrinking Man, which is a phenomenal sci-fi novel from the 50s. And so maybe if I hadn't consumed all those books, I'd be looking at this being like, fuck, this is cool. Like,
and I think a lot of comic book readers would be in that boat.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Like, a lot of younger comic book readers in the 1980s probably weren't reading fucking Kafka or Dostoevsky. You know what I mean? They weren't reading. Yeah, they certainly weren't reading Kafka.
And that is why they will borrow those kind of influences.
Yeah, totally.
Because they'll be like, oh, this is cool, but I'll kind of do a comic book version of this for a larger audience.
Yeah, and whilst. Yeah, and again,
larger to a different audience, I should say.
And again, and it, even though it doesn't quite hit the mark for me, those themes are there and they're noticeable and they're coming through, aren't they? And so, yeah, I think overall this gets a thumbs up, mate.
Yeah, I think I do have a little bit of, again, it's hard to criticize 80s stuff for this, but the whole like Peter Parker having an existential crisis about his own mortality at the same time that Kraven plans to shoot him and put him in a grave on the ground. Like, there's that, you have to give that allowance for like these types of comics. And, once you move past that, then you go, oh, thematically, it's really interesting.
Thematically, it's interesting, and it comes together quite well. And again, it looks really attractive.
Yes.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I think...
It was a fun read. Enjoyable.
Yeah, and in comparison to later Spider-Man stuff, which kind of, I think oftentimes people have tried to bring this level of angst to Spider-Man again.
Oh, constantly, yeah.
I mean, what's the one with the Infinite
One More Day?
Earths? One More Day. One More Day, where he goes through the multiverse shit.
Yeah, that's like a really small aspect of that story. I'm surprised that that's what you've latched on to as like the way to remember it.
Yeah, because what I actually remember from that story is Peter mooching around being angsty.
Yes. Which was the best part of it, I think.
It was
the ending that sucks.
Yeah, this is it. I think actually kind of, we like a quippy Spider-Man, but we also like an angsty Peter Parker.
Yeah. People shit on One More Day, but you have to acknowledge it's because of the ending, which the writer, Joe Straczynski, wanted his name taken off. Like he was made to do that ending, and he didn't want to do it.
Because we did an episode on it, didn't we?
Yes.
And I remember there being elements of it that we both really liked.
When he's going around trying to bargain for Aunt May's life,
it
would have been really good if it had ended with him accepting Aunt May dying and having to move on, instead of Mephisto being like, well, I'll swap your marriage for Aunt May's life. What? Why?
Dumb.
I tell you one thing I did enjoy in Kraven as well. I think they did a really good job of making Vermin take him from psychopathic cannibal killer to sympathetic because he's being tortured in a cage by Kraven. Like, I think they did a good job of doing both of those things in one comic.
Yeah, no, totally.
I felt sorry for him at one point. I went, hang on, wasn't he murdering and eating women a bit earlier? It was interesting.
No, it is interesting, isn't it? And again, it's just sort of, I don't necessarily love the Vermin subplot, but they needed to have a Spider-Man villain for Kraven to beat so that he could go do hero work.
And one who who was not smart enough to realize, it wasn't Spider-Man earlier when it was Kraven, and just be immediately angry. And there's a few villains they could have used for that. They could use Scorpion or Rhino or one of those dumber villains.
There's the Lizard Man in the...
Yes. The Lizard would have been perfect for this kind of
The Lizard
story.
would have been great, wouldn't it? Is it the Lizard?
Yeah,
is that
the
what
Lizard.
It's called?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, overall though, I thought this was a really fun read.
Yeah.
And again, it's definitely made me want to delve into some more stuff from the 70s and 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel as though, and you probably may have less of this feeling than me, but I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and I'm kind of no longer at the point where it's like, oh, my friend Jamie who knows nothing about comic books.
Yes. That's why in the intro, I just paint you as someone who reads books.
Yeah. Because,
not that you don't read comics.
Because initially the whole joke was Jamie knows fuck all about comic books.
Yeah.
But obviously I've spent 2 years reading at least one comic book a week. And so actually, I would say at this point, I know more about comics and the lore of comics than most people. And I'm building a really rich picture of comic books through the years. But the sort of 70s and 80s, we haven't delved into. And mostly because we focus on modern stuff and stuff that's releasing. But I think next year I would really like to focus up on just bread and butter comic book stuff.
I mean, doing some of the biggest comics from the years prior, I think that's an interesting thing.
And I think it would be. Again, if you're a listener, talk to us.
They could be our one for us. Because right now our one for us is an interesting indie title.
Yeah,
but we can swap in some these the biggest comics from the decades.
Because hasn't it been fun?
Yeah.
And I think it's been a really interesting episode.
Yeah, I know the one we will do at some point is 60s Prime Fantastic Four with Stan Lee and
Jack Kirby.
Yeah, Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
So that'll be I think you'll really enjoy that.
Yeah.
And I think that's as much as to say on the comic. I got one little fun bit for the end. Just very quick, fun little thing that I thought you'd appreciate.
2 hours later.
Yeah. Just a Rick and Morty meme. Just quick in and out, quick article. We're going to talk about it. That's fine. But there was a thing recently. So it should be a couple of weeks ago since this episode comes out. But basically, they polled people on what they found most attractive in the opposite sex. Yeah. Very heteronormative study, but the results are interesting. So when it comes to specifically what straight women were asked what they found attractive about men, specifically what hobbies, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to guess what the number one most attractive was?
Well, go on then.
I think you'll appreciate this. It was reading. Presumably reading books,
So I have an English degree.
Which I'm only just using as of now.
Do you know what? I must admit, when I was dating, one of the things that came up was like, oh, he's well read.
Yeah.
Well, that was always one of the things that came up was like, oh, he's really well read.
Quick thing of the top 5: reading, foreign languages, playing instrument, cooking, woodworking, painting, writing, that kind of stuff. Stereotypical, like, oh, I'd like a guy who does X, and it's one of those things, right?
Yeah.
At the other end of the spectrum, they have the least attractive hobbies of that women find in men, right? And they have the top 15 least attractive,
Go on,
right?
then.
And I bring it to you now. The silver lining is of the 15 the least attractive, the least attractive, so basically 15th place in least attractive is comic books. We did it, guys.
Wow.
We did it. But it's 15. So apparently 33% said it was unattractive. Or no, attractive. So 2/3 find it unattractive, 1/3 still found it attractive.
What are the most off-putting hobbies?
So the most off-putting, and this is comparatively, this is in your 3-4% kind.
Yeah.
Is we've got number 1 is manosphere stuff. So that's like your Andrew Tate kind of stuff.
Oh, gross. Well, at least, I mean, lads, this is just letting you know, boys, particularly if you're a younger listener, women want you to read and think and create art and not watch Andrew Tate, right?
And a third are fine with you reading comic books, which is, again, I'm taking that as a win.
But, dude, that is 1 in every 3 women. I'll take that.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good odds. I was happy with that. But top 5 as well. I think this is so funny. So top 5, manosphere number 1, gambling number 2, porn number 3, arguing online number 4.
Makes sense. I get it.
Number 5, just a complete stray bullet, like, bystander here. Funko Pops. And I'm neutral.
So good.
I'm neutral to Funko Pops, but I feel bad for any men collecting Funko Pops now. Like, oh, what?
Oh no, my hobby's really
of the top 5. Like the top 4, I'm like, absolutely fair enough. Like, get it together, lads. Number 5, I'm like, oh, come on. Like,
this is. I mean, speaking as a man who likes to collect things, I have quite notable collections of like books and vinyl records and guitars and Pokemon cards. I collect Pokemon cards, and even I find Funko Pops a bit off-putting.
Yeah, but again, I'm like neutral to them. Like, I never touch them, but I'm like, I don't have any disdain for people who collect
own one.
them.
Somebody gifted me one once, and it was like a rare edition.
It was a gift.
It was a gift.
I know.
But it was also like John Lennon in the post-Beatles concert.
That's
where he
how
played.
they get you. There's a Funko Pop for everything.
Yeah, it's John Lennon in like the green shirt with the little round specs playing his like Les Paul Jr. And I'm like, that's pretty fucking cool. It lives on a shelf. It's not. I never unboxed it. It lives in a shelf in its box because apparently that's how you're meant to keep them.
Apparently, and you're meant to have a bookcase full of them or something, or convert a wall into a display for them. I think that's how it works.
No, it is an off-putting hobby.
And in terms of stray bullets as well, like towards the end, I think 10th place, Magic the Gathering, which again, I don't know anything about, but I feel sorry that they're significantly lower than comic books.
I mean, the thing with dating somebody who plays Magic the Gathering is that you know that they will never have any money for anything else.
They'll never cheat on you.
Well, no, they're busy.
Exactly.
They're busy making decks, mate.
It's that. Do you see the Shaw like a few years ago? But it was like the trend of where people ask stupid questions for responses for engagement.
Yeah.
One of them was, "Tell me your boyfriend won't cheat on you without telling me."
Yeah.
And it's the guy. Girl goes into the room. She's like, "What are you doing, babe?" He's like playing with his Hot Wheels. He's like, "I just got this cool Hot Wheels." And I was like, that guy's cool.
I definitely saw one like that, and the guy was like filming like a table of Pokemon cards, and she says,
"Was it you?"
No, it wasn't. No, it genuinely wasn't me. But he's filming a tape because I'm not super social media-y. Like,
right.
I have a small collection of Pokemon cards. If anybody cared,
people have to knock on your door and ask to see it, like old-fashioned.
Yeah. Like, it has to be like somebody's interested in them, and I'll be like, oh, here's a couple binders of like interesting Pokemon cards, and it's like most of the really interesting shit is like kind of offbeat stuff from the 90s that isn't super expensive because I'm not really into that either. And so it's like, oh, I have like a collection of the glossy vending machine promo cards, which are like rare and interesting and cool, and they have like unique art on them, but they're not crazy expensive to buy, and amassing that collection didn't bankrupt me like having a bunch of base set Zards would have done.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? But no, so it's this guy filming a bunch of Pokemon cards, and his girlfriend walks in and she goes, "Oh, what's your best Pokemon card?" And he squeals, drops his phone, and goes to a glass case, and he's like, "Oh, that would be my shiny Charizard from Champion's Path." And I'm like, that is quite a nice Zard. But it's just the fact that
nice
like
Zard, bro.
if anyone's interested, I do have the Shining Fate Zard. If there's any
fancy,
Pokemon, if there's
Fancy Dan.
I pulled it.
I bet you did.
I pulled it. Oh, that's what you find funny.
It's a funny term. It's funny that that's got used for now for Pokemon card collecting.
Well, yeah, because you pull it from the pack.
I know, I get it. But it's just it's funny because it sounds like something else.
It's not the only thing I pulled that day.
There you go. So I think that's all we've covered, and we had a little fun towards the end. We had fun the whole episode, I think.
Yeah, I think it was a great episode.
You know what's not fun? I listen to podcasts as well. We both do. I had one podcast, right? And you know how we feel about bloody calls to action at the end of podcasts,
yeah,
right?
We don't like them.
Particularly egregious thing I heard.
Yeah.
It was a podcast where they tried to squeeze them in under the guise of being against them. Do you know what I mean? Like they were trying to.
I hate it when
have
people
their
do
cake
that.
and eat it too, because they were acting like, I can't remember the podcast name. I don't remember who it is off the top of my head, but they were trying to be like, "Oh, we'd hate it if you did this," and then just said all the shit anyway.
Right. So they were like, "Oh, it would be really awful if you emailed us at like, I don't know, comicglitter@gmail.com."
Yes, exactly like that. And I thought,
Right.
you absolute bastards. You're trying to have it both ways.
You're there on your podcast asking for people to give you 5-star reviews.
And they were like redirecting them to like where like other pages they had, like their YouTube page, their TikTok page.
Oh, I
that
bet
kind
one of
stuff.
them had a really shitty YouTube channel that they were trying to plug at the time.
Plugging it on the podcast.
It's fucking
for something
awful.
else. And I was like, mate, you're tiered podcasting. Like, do that.
Because neither of us have YouTube channels, do we?
Well, I mean, I do, but
Do
I
you?
would never.
I didn't know about
I would
this.
never plug it here on this. Like,
Right.
I wouldn't tell people to go to Comic Stan, YouTube page.
Well, no, because what would be the point?
No, because it's distasteful.
It's a murky practice, and we will not engage in it.
It's uncouth, and I will not stand for it, is what I'm trying to say.
Of course.
But I just thought that was worth bringing up. It's like public service kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just something we needed to talk about at the end, wasn't
And
it?
if you ever find us,
That bit is so worn out, right?
if you ever find us doing something like that, tell us, because
That bit is so stale now, isn't it?
yeah, if you ever find us doing something like that, we will stop the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.